All right, hey everyone. Today, what I wanted to do is I wanted to give a recap of my 2016 numbers for blogging. And I'm going to do something a little bit different today that I'm just kind of not used to doing. So I'm actually going to record this podcast live on camera. Now, what's funny is usually when I record a podcast by myself, I don't have a guest. I'm usually a basket case. I'll record 15 seconds of something and then think that I said something stupid. And so I'll hit the stop button and then I'll go back and re-record it again. So doing it in this way is, via Facebook Live is probably better for me because that means I'm just going to do it all in one take. It's not going to take me 3 hours to do a half-hour podcast episode. So if you guys wouldn't mind, again, this is my second Facebook Live, and I haven't started recording yet, but if you wouldn't mind just leaving a comment that the audio and everything's working okay, I'll go ahead and get started with the podcast portion in a little bit. And the way it's supposed to look right now is I'm supposed to have I wrote about this on my blog already. I have a graphic next to my face. And so it looks like technically everything is working. So we're going to go ahead and get started and see how this goes. So let me hit the record button on the podcast here before we begin. All right, guys. First podcast recording via Facebook Live. Welcome to the My Wife Quit Her Job podcast. Today I have a very special guest, and that special guest is actually me. Since my wife just closed the books on mywifequitherjob.com, I thought it would be good to kind of give a little recap of how I did and everything that I did this past year to reach the $1 million mark, which is really cool. I hit two major milestones this year. So the first one I just mentioned, I made over $1 million in revenue, which is something that I never thought that I'd be able to do with my blog. With my store certainly, but not with the blog for some reason, because it still feels like kind of funny money to me in a way. The second major milestone that I hit was that I finally quit my job after 17 years of working at the exact same company. Now, out of both of those milestones, I would have to say that quitting was actually more difficult to me than making the money. And the reason why it was so hard for me is you got to understand when you're at a company for 17 years, you build a lot of these friendships. And my entire identity was carried along with my profession. And here's the thing about me. I don't know if you guys know this about me, but I've known that I've wanted to be an electrical engineer since age 10. My dad was an electrical engineer, and really, bottom line, as an Asian, I really only had three choices to begin with. I could be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. So naturally, I chose an engineer because my dad was one. And I've actually designed microprocessors for over 20 years. And so a lot of my brain power over the years has been dedicated to designing microprocessors. And if you've done anything for that long, you probably know that it's really tough to give something up like that. It was a part of my identity. And here's the thing. So I was just at my buddy's engagement, and one of his friends came up to me and asked me, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" And I'd already quit at that point. And honestly, I didn't know what to say. Am I a blogger? Am I a writer? Am I a podcaster? Am I a conference thrower? And so what I ended up telling that guy was, I'm actually unemployed right now and just kind of doing my own thing. And the guy was like, "Oh man, okay, that's tough. If you ever need any leads or help getting a job, I can hook you up." And I was like, "Oh no, that's good. I'm just doing my own thing. It's not a big deal." And I ended up just feeling a little awkward at that conversation because in the old days, I could just say that I was a hardware engineer, a microprocessor designer, and that'd be the end of the conversation because no one would ever want me to go into more depth about the technical stuff. So now if I say I'm a business owner or a blogger or a writer, the follow-on questions are, "Oh yeah, what do you write about? What do you sell and whatnot?" And to be honest, sometimes I don't want to get into all that. And it was just so much easier back in the day just to say I'm an engineer. No one wants to know anymore, and that's that. I did want to talk a little bit about what it's been like to quit, because it wasn't like an amazing thing when I first quit. And perhaps it's because I was just kind of slowly leading up to that point. I wrote a blog post back in June saying that I had quit my job, but that was actually slightly a lie. I did announce my resignation during that point, But the company gave me this really sweet offer to stay just 2 days a week, gave me full health insurance, and there were some other line items to that deal which I don't want to disclose publicly, but in a nutshell, it was an offer that I could not refuse. And so I stayed on working 2 days a week, and then I finally left cold turkey on October 1st. And it's just been okay. And one of the reasons why, and you guys might be thinking that I'm crazy for thinking this way, but I've got too much time on my hands right now. So right now I work until noon. I usually have lunch with my wife. Then I usually work out in the afternoon. Then I pick up the kids, and that's it pretty much. There's just very little social interaction outside of Skype. I got my Skype friends and that sort of thing. But what I've found to be difficult about quitting is that it's really hard to stay motivated in a way. In the old days when I worked my full-time job and I still ran my blog, my podcast, and my store, I only had like a really small amount of time to get my stuff done. And I had to plan my day really carefully. And now that I have so much time, like I don't feel like I have to plan anything. And so, big blocks of time can pass before you know it. So I've had to be a lot more diligent about planning my day. But it has also allowed me to kind of figure out what makes me happy in life. And I'll probably get into a little bit more about that in a future podcast episode. But having all this time has caused me to think about a lot of different things and what actually makes me happy. Anyways, I don't want to bore you with those details. Let's go ahead and jump to the numbers real quick. So revenues for my blog increased by 46%. As I mentioned before, we hit $1 million. February was the highest month where I made over $125,000 in a single month. The traffic to my blog increased by 15%. The profit margins for a blog, of course, are astronomical, 90+%. And I just want to say this, what I really love about blogging is that it's really highly scalable, and I can honestly maintain my blog in just 15 hours a week. I've got it kind of down to a system. It takes me 3 hours to write a blog post, and I run one blog post per week. It takes me roughly 2 hours to put together a podcast. It takes me 10 hours roughly to manage my course and my email load. And so overall, it's very scalable. And that's what I like about blogging. Now, what's funny about all this also is I routinely get a bunch of entrepreneurs on my podcast. And even though the blog is doing really well, I still have my insecurities, so to speak. Now, I recently interviewed someone who is really high profile. And if I told you who this person was, you would instantly recognize that person. World-renowned author. He basically flat out told me that my blog was just a job and not a business. And at first, I was going to argue with him and debate back and forth, but he is right in a way. The blog and everything I do that's related to the blog cannot function without me being there. Like, I got to be the one to write the blog post and that sort of thing. Of course, I could probably contract it out, but it just wouldn't be the same if I wasn't putting out that content myself. So instead of trying to argue with the guy, I just let it go because, honestly, at 15 hours per week, it's not really a bad gig. And, $1 million is nothing to sneeze at either. So, but anyways, you probably noticed that the traffic to my blog went up only 15%. And the revenue actually went up 46%. And for 2016, my intention was actually not to grow the blog that much. I was going to focus all of my efforts on my e-commerce store. And what ended up happening was I didn't end up focusing my time on my blog or my store all that much because I ended up working until October. That was kind of unplanned. But I did want to talk a little bit about how I did grow my blog that 46%. So one of the things that I did was I ran more webinars. And I just wanted to take a little bit of time to give a quick shout out to Grant Baldwin and Tony Anderson, who kind of pushed me towards giving webinars a try because I did not want to give them at all. I can be somewhat antisocial at times. I like to hide behind a computer and do coding. I don't really particularly like doing webinars. This Facebook Live is a little bit different because it's a little more off the cuff and I can just talk about whatever. But I was reluctant to try it. But then Grant sent me this spreadsheet of all of his profits that he was making with his webinars. And then Tony kept nagging me to give it a try. Nagging is probably not the right word. She kept urging me to try because she knew that it would be big for me. So I ended up doing one and it made $60,000 in 90 minutes of work. And then I just sat there. I was like, $60,000, 90 minutes of work. All right, it's not bad. I can do these. I can do them once a month. And I still don't completely enjoy doing them. So I just do them once a month. And what's cool about these webinars is that it's like instant cash, right? So during the month of November, my wife told me that I was short of my $1 million goal by about $30,000. And I was like, don't worry about it. I'll just do a webinar. And so I just did a webinar a couple weeks later, and that webinar ended up doing $50,000. And so I hit my goal in early December, actually. Now, the funny thing about webinars is I don't really know how they work. When I get on a webinar, I'm certainly not an expert, and it just converts so well. And I think it really has to do with like the real-time and personal nature of giving a live webinar. I always stay on till the very end to answer as many questions as possible. And for all of you guys who know me, I'm not really a sales guy. I'm not a salesperson by any means. So what's funny about all this also is I started having this success with webinars, and I ended up giving 2 speeches about webinars at FinCon and Digital Collab, which are 2 awesome conferences this past year. If anyone is interested about how I run my webinars, I could be coaxed into doing an a Facebook live session or even a podcast about it if you guys are interested. If you guys are interested, leave a comment in the box for me. The other thing that I did to grow my blog this past year is I ran a lot of Facebook ads. Now, for all you guys who aren't quite familiar with what I sell a course that retails for about $1,300. Now, no one is going to spend $1,300 with me on impulse. And you got to get people to like you. You got to get people to trust you. Very few people will actually even sign up for your email list unless they trust you. And so what I started doing this past year is I started running ads to some of my best content. These are great blog posts that I'd written in the past just to get a little bit of mind share. And then I'd run ads to these posts. And when you run ads to posts, it ends up being really cheap. Some of my best posts and ads, I'm paying like 9 to 13 cents per click, which is really good. And then what I do, for all the people who actually land on that page and read the article, I retarget them to an email sign-up page. And because they're already familiar with my work, they've read a blog post, they're that much more likely to sign up for my email list. And as a result, I've been paying between $1 and $2 per email sign-up for those people who have actually experienced my content in the past. I've also tried running ads straight to a sign-up form, but I end up paying a lot more money when I do that, sometimes on the order of $5 or $6. So just by sending people to content first and then a sign-up form, it ends up being cheaper and much more effective. So right now, I'm not really scaling these ads, but I plan to this year in 2017. And I've got a strategy plan for this year that I'll probably talk about publicly a little bit later once I've implemented it and once I know that it actually works. But ultimately, the key to all of my course sales is email. Email is the backbone of my entire blogging business. Now, for all of you guys who are unfamiliar with that, I offer a free 6-day mini course on how to start your own e-commerce store. And if you're curious right now, you can head on over to mywifequitterjob.com. There's a sign-up form right there on the front page, and I'll deliver that course to you via email. Now, I've given a bunch of talks about my email sequence in the past, but I'll just quickly summarize a little bit. The first 9 lessons of that free 6-day mini course are hardcore teaching lessons, and I actually don't hold anything back. I teach you everything that it takes to get started in e-commerce. And then, so it's a 30 email sequence, and the remaining 20 or so emails are what I call get to know Steve type of emails. And what's funny about this is I have separate emails targeting females and separate emails targeting males in particular to just kind of get them to jump on the Steve bandwagon, so to speak. So for example, for the women, I have an email that talks about when we had our firstborn and she couldn't stop crying. And I talk about the story how I felt so prepared for my first baby. I was reading all these baby books and I just got really cocky about being able to calm down a baby. But when my baby girl finally came out, she ended up crying uncontrollably, and all of that book knowledge that I had amassed was worthless. I ended up running to Babies R Us and buying all these toys to help pacify my child. And the point of that email, of course, is to say that no matter what you read online and no matter how many books you read, you're never going to be prepared to start your own business, and that's why you need extra instruction to sign up for my class. So that email actually goes out to the women. For the guys, I have a post on six-pack abs and comparing getting six-pack abs to starting your business. So it's really funny. So for both of those posts, I always get a lot of comments on the six-pack one from guys and then a lot of comments from the women about the baby post. For those latter 20 emails, I also do a bunch of case studies with my students. And needless to say that this email sequence converts really well to get people to actually sign up for my class. Now, one other thing that happened this past year, which was just really incredible for me, was on May 19th, 2016, I started my own conference, which is called the Seller Summit. Now, here's the thing about the Seller Summit. I had always wanted to be a keynote speaker, but no one was willing to let me become a keynote at any of their conferences. And so instead of kind of begging people to let me be their keynote, I decided to start my own conference instead. And once again, I want to give a special thanks out to Tony Anderson for pushing me to do this. And she is actually a partner with me in launching this conference. Anyways, this conference was actually the most fun that I've ever had outside of my wedding reception, just in case you're listening, Jen. And I had a blast. And I decided to throw another one. And I'll probably do a separate FB Live on this, but the reason I started the conference of my own, and there are other e-commerce conferences out there, it's mainly because I was just tired of conferences with just inspirational speakers. I wanted to start a conference that was more strategy focused, based on strategies and low-level tactics, and kind of avoid all the inspirational stuff. Because, I don't know if you guys know my personality, but I don't need to be inspired. I just need to learn. And I was just betting that a bunch of other people out there had the same philosophy. And so as a result, I only get hardcore e-commerce entrepreneurs to actually talk at my conference. These are entrepreneurs who are actually getting their own hands dirty. Now, there's a huge difference in actually doing something versus having high-level knowledge about something or even contracting stuff out to other people. I like to get speakers who are kind of deep in the trenches and doing everything and getting their hands dirty. And so the summit was actually designed to provide very actionable content. And the other thing that I was just kind of tired about other conferences was going to like multi-thousand person events. Like you can get really lost in the crowd when there's just so many people there. And so I purposely made my conference very small and intimate so I could actually form some meaningful, intimate relationships. And so those are some of the core philosophies why I decided to start my own conference, besides wanting to be a keynote, of course. And I just want to give a quick shout out. Tickets are on sale right now for the Seller Summit. Go to sellerssummit.com. The price is actually going to go up on February 1st, so be sure to get your tickets before the price goes up. Now, the other thing that I did, or I should say that I'm constantly doing, is I am always improving my class. Now, here's the thing about courses. If you don't update them, they're going to get stale. And what's ironic is that the more work that I put forth on improving my e-commerce store, it actually improves my training class because it creates a lot more material for me to teach. And so I spent a large portion of the year, improving my online store. And, I'm not going to go into too much depth about what I did for my store because incidentally, the next podcast is going to go over the year-end recap for my e-commerce store. But I've been updating my course constantly with all the latest things that I've been doing to improve my online store. So a couple of these things are, I completely revamped the email autoresponders for my store. I experimented with a lot of Facebook ads for my store. I talked a lot about conversion optimization. I invited more guests to the class, industry experts to come talk to the students about areas of their expertise. I also sent out this survey and was very pleasantly surprised by the results. So here's what's really cool. 56% of the students who have been with me a year and launched their own product are now making at least 4 figures per month. And 9% of these students are making more than $50,000 a month in revenue, which is really awesome. It makes me feel really good. I'm going to try to get some of these students to come on the podcast to talk about their experiences. You probably have already heard from Jen DePauli, who runs showercurtainhq.com. You might want to check out that episode if you haven't listened to it. But right now I have 2 other students lined up to tell their stories as well. So, given my results in blogging and the fact that I made over $1 million this past year, does that mean that you should go out and start blogging, or should you start an online store? And I get this question a lot because I've been successful in both areas. And the answer I always give is it depends on your long-term goals. I'm going to be upfront and say this. Blogging is a slog. It actually took me 3 years before I made any sort of meaningful money with it. And yeah, it can be hard to do something for 3 years and not have anyone really reading your stuff or making any money. But it's really incredible once the money does start rolling in because it ramps up really quickly. Contrast that with my store. I actually ended up making 6 figures right away. But in the past couple of years, the growth has slowed. It's still in the double digits. We've maintained double digits since 2007, but it's not as high as the blog. So bottom line, if you want to make money sooner rather than later, you want to sell something online. And so if you want to make money sooner, go with the online store because you have a product, you're putting it up there, and someone is exchanging you money for an actual product. But if you have a 3 to 5 year time horizon, I would say, I would start a blog, maybe a podcast, and really build your own personal brand. So of the 2 businesses that I have today, I feel like the blog has much higher barriers to entry because no one can take my identity away from me. I've built up a personal brand. And this is despite the fact that my mom constantly asks me, why are people reading your stuff? And I told her my results, actually. I told her that I did $1 million. And she was like, what? Why are people buying your stuff? And so at least now it's gone from, why are people reading your stuff to why are people buying your stuff? So in the Asian land, that's like a huge upgrade in terms of praise. Anyways, that's pretty much all I had to say about how my blog performed in 2016. Going forward, I don't know if I want to take on any additional projects just yet. I do have a software product that I'm hoping to release later on this year, but for now, I'm just going to focus on making my existing properties better. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed this live podcast. This episode probably won't go out for another 2 weeks. And so if you guys are on here live and watching this on Facebook, you get a preview into the future. Thanks a lot for joining me.